燃え上がれガンダム。
Welcome to Weekly Suit Gundam, the special bonus podcast brought to you by the folks at the Weekly Stuff Podcast. I'm Sean Chapman.
And I'm Jonathan Lack.
And we are here to wrap up our journey through the world of Build Fighters and Build Fighters paraphernalia, because they made a whole lot of random specials about those shows. So we'll be talking about a whole series of OVAs. The Model Suit Gunpla Builders Beginning G OVA. We'll be talking about Tri-Island Wars. We'll be talking about GM's Counterattack and the Build Fighters Battlogue series. So if you haven't watched those yet, go through and check those OVAs out. But before we get into our main topic for today, Jonathan, I think you have something very cool to talk about for the podcast.
Yeah, if you are a Weekly Stuff podcast listener, you'll have heard me talk about this a little bit, but for Weekly Suit Gundam, you probably know, because I shared it back when we did our Evangelion rebuild episode, that I am teaching a course at the University of Iowa this fall, where I'm a PhD student, called Giant Robots on Screen. It is our film club screening series where students come and basically it's just a film screening and discussion series, and they get 1 credit for that. As long as they show up. And we started with Pacific Rim, and then we jumped into our unit on mecha anime, and this week we finished Mobile Suit Gundam 3. We did the entire trilogy, the original theatrical Gundam trilogy of 1, 2, 3, the recuts of the TV show. So Sean, I walked out of the building after finishing screening number 3 and having the discussion and everything, and I just kind of felt this come down of like, that was like the biggest item on my bucket list. Now I have no purpose in life. No, I'm kidding. I have other aspirations. But there is something surreal, Sean, that I got to do this. I, at a major American university, screened all 3 Gundam movies in like a theater setting and had a big discussion with a class of like 60 people, none of whom had seen Gundam before, although I did learn one person had brought a friend who was a Gundam hyper fan who was seeing these for the first... He'd seen the show, but not the movies, so he was super into it, because this is also like open to the public if you're around. And it was so cool, Sean. It was like, selfishly, it was very cool to see the movies on the big screen, because I have the Blu-ray set from Japan, and they look fucking great projected on the big screen. Like, they're really nice Blu-rays, and the sound is also, it's the original mono sound mix from 81 and 82. And I think sometimes people hear mono and they associate like, oh, the sound must not be very good. It's a fucking great sound mix, and like it's all lossless, and just like in that theater space it just knocked you back in your seat. Really, really good stuff. The music sounded great. So it was really cool to see. Like, the third movie, has the most new animation, and it is really apparent when you project it at that size what is new. And it's just like the animation in that third movie, even a lot of students in the class who don't pick up on that stuff that much were like, man, the animation was really good in this movie, because it's just phenomenal. Yeah. And it was really cool to just walk through and kind of introduce this series to people. Like, I talked about this a little bit on the Weekly Stuff podcast, but that first movie, the big culture shock of Gundam 1 to most of my students was that Yoshiyuki Tomino loves having characters slap other characters. Yep. And so, like, 15 minutes in, you have Amuro slap Frau to snap her out of it and have her run away. You have Bright slapping Amuro. You have Sayla slapping Kai. You have Isolina's dad slapping Isolina. And it just continues throughout the series. They're slapping all over the place. I warned them about Slugger Law before we even meet Slugger Law. I said, you guys, Slugger Law is the American who munches on cheeseburgers and slaps the shit out of people. And they were all really excited. They, like, when we got there for week 2, they're like, is Slugger in this one? And I'm like, I don't think, like, maybe at the very end, but you'll see him more in week 3. And so in week 3, they were all excited to see Slugger Law, and they were definitely, the Mirai falls in love with the guy who hit her got a reaction. So there was a lot to break down there. But, you know, I was really impressed with my students being open-minded on it because, you know, Mobile Suit Gundam is not throwing someone into the deep end of anime, but it is a series of movies based on stuff animated in 1979. It does not really look or move like anime they would see if they're watching Crunchyroll or Netflix today. And they are big, long movies with a lot of plot and a lot of ideas. And, you know, one thing I also realized is that I think you and I both prefer how the TV show handles the new type stuff in that it's like, it's more implied that it's a term not everyone in the world knows, and it kind of, it's there in the show, but it's not named until near the end. The movies ease you into it much more and use the word more, and I do realize why Tomino did that. In part, it is a practical thing. It is much easier to onboard people for that idea if you're seeding it for 2 movies and then pay it off in the 3rd. And so the students were, like, eased into that in an interesting way. And that 3rd one, they kind of liked but had a lot of questions about the first movie. They were open-minded on it. They really loved the second movie, and they thought that was a big step up. And I think the second movie structurally is the weakest of the 3, but I see why they loved it, because the second movie is when you go deep on all the characters. And
and if you haven't watched the TV show, which obviously we had, all of that would be new information for them, right? So it's like, you get a lot of, like, really great, as you say, very character-based storytelling, and all, like, the kind of plot and, like, place setting has been dealt with in the first movie.
Yes, exactly. So they really liked that second movie. And then I think they liked the third movie, but there was also just kind of a stunned silence when it ended. And there was a lot of, like, processing and people trying to, like, figure out what had happened and, like, you know, because the third movie gets trippy as shit. Lala is a big swing of a character. But we had a really productive discussion about it. You know, I wish we'd had more. These are 3-hour blocks, and the Gundam movies are the only movies over 2 hours I've programmed. And so, but I figured since we had 3 weeks to talk about each of them, we overall had enough time to discuss it, because we had about a half hour at the end of every movie. And I wish we had been able to talk even longer, because there's so much to pick apart, especially from that third movie. But it was a lot of fun. It was fun to show these movies. It was fun to talk. It was, for me, just like, one of the great pleasures of film is showing a movie you love to someone who hasn't seen it and, like, seeing their reaction. And I got to do that with 60 people. And just
that's why this podcast exists, is because I didn't know anybody who had seen Gundam, and I was like, I have gone on this crazy journey of watching this show that is, this franchise that is amazing. I'm like, how do I get Jonathan to just fucking watch this so we can talk about it?
And so I just had fun watching the movies and listening to, what did they laugh at? What did they react to? You know, sometimes they laughed at things that they found cheesy that I find moving, or is just stuff that is very, like, I totally understand why someone would laugh the first time they hear Amuro go, "Ikimasu!" really out loud, because maybe they haven't seen that. But, like, you know, little things like just remembering how funny Haro and the kids are in that series, like Kika, Cats, and Let's. They were all very concerned that Kika, Cats, and Let's weren't getting off the ship because, you know, and I promised them, I said, there's a payoff to Kika, Cats, and Let's that is worth it. And they agreed with me, because the end of Gundam 3, there's a payoff to Kika, Cats, and Let's. But they're also very funny. The character I think they loved the most was Kai, because Kai is very funny. I also did not realize until watching it in this setting, and I think part of it was it being on the big screen, there are so many shots where Kai is in the background goofing off that are very funny. Like, there's one, like, where Amuro comes on the bridge in movie 3, and they're talking about new types, and Kai is up in the corner near Marker and Oscar, and he's just making faces at Amuro, and it's fucking hilarious. And so they really liked Kai, which is cool, because next week we're watching Pat Labor, where Toshio Furukawa voices the main character in Pat Labor also. So we'll get some more of him, because he's just a great actor. But yeah, so it was fun, and, you know, led to some real philosophical discussions, certainly, for that third movie.
Yeah, no, yeah, especially if you have, if you're not going in knowing what you're getting in for, some of that new type shit is gonna throw you for a loop. I hope in a way that they enjoyed. Maybe they're enlightened now. Maybe they'll go out and, you know, start protesting for Space Noid independence or something.
I had a little revelation that I kind of thought out loud in real time during the discussion. Well, while I was watching the movie and then during the discussion, that I had never, it's so obvious, but I hadn't realized how central third eye imagery is to OG Gundam. that, you know, we talked a little bit about Lala, like, is there some discomfort with the only character visibly of color being kind of the mystical one? Yes, but also I don't think that's why Tomino did it that way. I think the thing he was specifically interested in is the bindi, which is that thing in Indian culture that is worn like on the forehead near where the third eye is, and it symbolizes like awakening and that part of the chakra and all of that kind of stuff. It symbolizes different things in different cultures, but so I'm oversimplifying here. But so you have that for Lala. The new type flashes, the little lightning, always comes out of that same spot. And I think most intriguingly, and my students were all like mind blown when I dropped this on them, I said, and where does Char get stabbed at the end of the show? He gets stabbed in that spot. And then I told them, like, and in Zeta and Char's counterattack and everything, he has that scar forever. And to me, is kind of the ultimate symbol of why he is not really a new type, is that's closed. He does not open up like that. And it's just like, it was cool to like watch it again and have some thoughts and stuff that like we haven't even talked about on the show, because you watch it enough times, you see all sorts of new things.
Yeah, no, it's a rich and infinite font of original Gundam. Like you can watch it as many times, the movies, the TV shows, and you'll definitely pick up more new stuff because there's a lot going on there.
Yeah, it was really cool. Because I was already planning on this, but people kept asking for recommendations. So I saved it until after the third movie was done, and I had some slides with recommendations. And I initially was going to say, like, here's my 5 favorite Gundam. And then I'm like, well, no, here's where, if you want to follow the story of Gundam, you need to do Zeta Double Zeta Char's Counterattack. There's adjacent stuff to that, like The Origin and Unicorn and Hathaway. And then I had a slide with 5 standalone recommendations, like 00 and War in the Pocket, and Gundam Build Fighters was a late addition to that, because everyone will love. When I said this is a sports anime but for Gundam, one kid in the audience went, yeah! And that was great. So I think they appreciated my list of recommendations. And then I had a slide just about Weekly Suit Gundam in case people were interested. But I also had, to kind of shroud it, I had a big graphic that said shameless plug on that slide. So anyway, I thought that was funny.
Very good.
But
you should have said it's like, oh, you have your recommendations. It's like, well, if people, you really want to watch another Gundam movie, well, I guess next week we can push Pat Labor for a week and let's watch G-Savior. It's a Gundam movie, but made for TV in Canada.
I thought you were going to say F91, just really throw them on the deep end.
Yeah, you're just like, look, I know that this movie is going to be very confusing to everybody, but trust me, I just love it. We're just going to fucking watch F91. The ending's amazing. Yeah. You'll be so confused in the middle, but the ending fucking rules.
I would kill to see that in that screening room we have, because it's very nice. Anyway, so I just wanted to tell that story because I was like thinking out loud on the pod. It's episode 6 of Weekly Suit Gundam, where we watched the trilogy, and I said, if I ever get to teach this film club class, I want to do this. This is episode 39 of Weekly Suit Gundam. I have now done it. Very full circle moment. We have brought Gundam to American education.
It's, you're doing God's work there, Jonathan. I think that now the next move is to see if you can just get an entire class that is just like the original TV show, and you just go episode by episode. Like when I was at Boulder, there was a literature class I always wanted to take, and I never could because it never lined up properly. But they had a Moby Dick class that everyone loved, where it was like a whole semester, and the only thing you did was Moby Dick. It was just like, we're just going for it, boys. Like, it's the whole class is just this one book. Should do that. His whole class is just this one TV show. Fuck it.
Gonna have a whole unit on Kukuru's Doan's Island. We're gonna watch the episode. We're gonna read the manga. We're gonna watch the movie. It's gonna be great.
You absolutely could do it. It would be a killer class.
All right. Well, I'll think about it. That's maybe a little above my pay grade to authorize the Gundam class. Anyway, you want to talk about some Gundam Build Fighters OVAs?
Yes, so let's get to our main topic for today, which this is sort of a grab bag episode that I came up with when we were getting close to the Build Fighters stuff. I had this moment of, like, panic of, like, how the fuck are we going to, what do we do? Like, how do we schedule this? As it was like, well, do we do, like, Model Suit Beginner G or whatever, and Build Fighters, and then GM's Counterattack is one episode, and then, like, Try and Try Island Wars is one episode? And it's like, because there are all of these OVAs, and there's, like, it's too much for us to just skip and ignore, but it's like also too much to just, I think, kind of throw onto an episode. So I decided, fuck it. We're just doing a grab bag episode. So Like I said at the top of this episode, we'll be doing Gunpla Builders Beginning G, we'll be doing Try Island Wars, GM's Counterattack, and Battlogue for this. All different kind of anime all around our fun little idea of let's just make some Gunpla, and what if we made some Gunpla and also those Gunpla could fight like Gundam? And so I think the best way to do this is to take these shows kind of in turn. And let's start with the original, where this whole crazy idea came from, which was the 30th anniversary of the Gunpla line of merchandise. And so Sunrise made this show called Model Suit Gunpla Builders Beginning G. And I cannot tell you how hard it is to say model suit and not mobile suit, because I have said the words mobile suit Gundam so many times in my life at this point that saying model suit Gunpla, it feels alien every time I try to say that phrase.
Sean, it's so alien that I've spent a lot of time looking at the title of this. I've got like a screenshot of the title card, and I still see the word mobile there. It says model, and I'm like, I thought it was mobile. It's so weird.
Yeah, it's a weird thing. You don't realize how much Gundam has trained you to see that MOB at the beginning of a word. But yeah, basically what Model Suit Gunpla Beginners G is, or Beginning G is it's a 3-part OVA, in total about 40 minutes long. It aired on TV and then also was streamed on the internet from August 2010 to December 2010, and then was later released as its own little like DVD or Blu-ray you could buy. But it's effectively what I would say like a giant advertisement for the Gunpla line of merchandise, as well as a couple of specific new Gunpla models that they made, the most notable one being the Beginning G, which is the main mobile suit that is used by the main character of the show. But it is written by Yosuke Kurada, who is the guy who writes Gundam Build Fighters and Try, as well as all of the specials. Like everything we're talking about today is all written by Kurada. Directed by Ko Matsuo, who's a Sunrise guy he's actually made a lot of really good stuff. He's the director for Thunderbolt later on. He's also the director for a show I really love. It's very different from something like Gundam, but Natsuki Rendezvous, just sort of like a romantic drama show that's really great. As well as, and I think the reason why he was picked for this is that he has done a lot of work storyboarding, directing, and doing key animation for the opening animations for a lot of different animes. Including he has done, I think it was 2, 3, and 4 openings for Mobile Suit Gundam Age. So he's done a lot of that kind of work, and that's a lot of what this show kind of feels like to me. Is it's got this really high level animation you'd expect for an OVA that feels almost like an OP for an anime, as well as it is like a very lavish commercial for their line of Gunpla products. And that's more or less kind of where this thing comes about. And the idea was so good that they kind of brought it back a few years later to then make Gundam Build Fighters.
Yeah, it's good. It's, I didn't love it, but I think it is very solid. And certainly I think if this was the first Gundam Build Fighters thing I had seen, I would probably be even more impressed with it, because this is like more transparently a commercial than either of the full-length TV series, just kind of by nature of what it is. It literally starts with them in Odaiba at the Gundam base, like buying Gunpla underneath the life-size Gundam. This was 2010, so you would have still had the original RX-78-2, not the Unicorn Gundam. But like, it's moving. The characters kind of pop. It gets sort of a formula that obviously Build Fighters is going to build on very quickly. And it has really good fights. The final fight in the series is fantastic. The animation is great. It does a different thing where it does the VR thing instead of having the Plavsky particle. I think the Plavsky particle is a better idea than the VR thing, but I do kind of like that this one has them in actual cockpits. There are definitely points in Build Fighters where I think it would make more sense to have them in cockpits than in like the standing arcade kind of thing. And so I liked some of that. But overall, it is a very easy 40-minute watch. And if you like Gundam Build Fighters, definitely an essential viewing. Yeah,
like it's for me, the main thing it stands out for is that it's just got some just luscious looking animation on those fights in a way that you don't see a lot of in this period, right? Like it especially the way it's animated, there's such a good sense of weight, in almost an ironic way, because technically the things are supposed to be Gunpla, but I guess it's all simulated anyways. But there's such a good like fluidity and weight to the mobile suits that reminds me broadly of the way things look in like a Gundam F91 or something more from that era. And I think some of the techniques they use, it's a bit of a throwback stylistically for Gundam to go to this animation style, and it just looks so fucking gorgeous. And particularly the fight in the first episode, I really love, because they also do this cool thing where, because it's, you know, this whole simulated thing, they have the Gundams fighting against the backdrop of a modern American city, like outside of the like Gunpla factory. And I wish that the other fights also were that kind of thing, because later they're just on like a colony or they're at like the Battle of Abaoku. But that first episode and that first fight, they leverage the idea of, we can set these fights anywhere, and the contrast of traditional contemporary Japanese cityscape with giant mobile suits stomping around is so fresh and cool that I really wish that, you know, this show and like Build Fighters shows had done stuff like that more, because it's really interesting in this.
Yeah, I totally agree. I love the animation style. It's a completely different animation style than the Build Fighters shows use. It's got much more rounded edges. It's got thicker lines. As you say, it looks a little more old school, like the way kind of a lot of digital animation, like sort of apes old school style. It sort of has that look. And that's one of the things that makes it most distinctive, is it just does not look like Gundam Build Fighters.
Yeah, no, absolutely. It's just a really strong aesthetic. So let's pull out like a couple of things from the show I think are interesting. One thing that I love about the show is that we get one of the world's great Gundam fans gets to show up again, because one of the main characters, who's like the villain of the first episode, is voiced by Hiroshi Kamiya, who is our boy from Gundam Age and 00 Gundam. He's Tieria in 00 Gundam, and then he's Zahart in Gundam Age. And he's like, in real life, Hiroshi Kamiya is a massive Gundam nerd, so it feels like you call him and say Gundam and he'll show up. So he's here, he plays that villain, and then he also is one of the main vocalists on the original song they use, My Proud My Play, which is by a band called Kamiyu, which is a combination of Kamiya, Hiroshi Kamiya's surname, as well as Maria, the name of the woman who voices the sort of female character in the show, because they did the two vocals. So it's definitely, you could feel that it is a Gundam. A lot of the people working on this, like Namikawa Daisuke is also one of the characters in this show. It's a lot of Gundam people and like Gundam voice actors kind of showing up and having a good time in another Gundam project, which is a nice kind of bonus.
And that song slaps. It's a really good song. And it's actually on Apple Music and Spotify, even in the States. I found that out the other day. So if you want to stream it, it's very easy to find. Which is always nice, because a lot of songs, it's not easy to find. So anyway, yeah, I like that. And I think that character's funny. The whole idea of the like idol who comes in and really likes Gunpla, but he doesn't build it himself. He just wants to collect them all. It's a good little character, and definitely a type they will explore in the TV shows that come after this.
Yeah. He's also got that sick looking high new Gundam.
Yes.
The Gunpla he's piloting is very, very fucking cool looking.
Absolutely.
All right, so what are some other elements from Beginning G that you want to kind of pull out, Jonathan?
The Beginning G. I liked this Gunpla when we see it in Gundam Build Fighters, because it's the one Reiji winds up building, that Takeshi Iori recommends for him. But we don't see much of it. We see it, but it is the main Gunpla here. It looks so fucking good in this animation style. Like, it is very clearly a Gundam designed because of this animation style, the same way, like, you know, F91, the F91 looks so good because it is the, you know, original designer, and it's that art style, and it's just perfect. It's a Gunpla I really want to build now. It's it's just one of my favorite Gundam designs. It's in terms of like mainline, you know, hero Gundams, it's really cool, and I think the way it's used in the fights is awesome. I also love that, because you have the main character getting better over time, you start out with like a straight build of it, and then he paints it, and then he customizes it, and so they keep evolving it in each of the three parts. What a fucking sick-ass Gundam this is. I love it.
Yeah, it draws a really good line that I think every main Gundam design has to do, which is it both needs to look very much like a Gundam, but then it also needs to be distinctive enough that you can tell at a glance that it's like, oh, this isn't the V Gundam, or this isn't the God Gundam, or this isn't the Zeta Gundam, this is the Beginning Gundam. And I think they like nail that line of it. It has all the Gundam-iness and the Gundam traits you want visually, while being very distinctive looking. And then I particularly think the idea of having the beam sabers held between each finger is such a distinct look. And how it's done here specifically, where they have that really fluid Char's Counterattack-esque animation on the beams, that the beams like curve and flow as he swings the swords through the air. It just looks so good. And then when it cuts through an enemy mobile suit and the pieces come apart and you can see every little like bit of like the polycaps and all that come apart and starts melting as the beams rip through it. Like that idea is so awesome that I kind of wish that they just like reused that for something that had more like animated fights in it or something, because it's such a cool concept for a weapon for a mobile suit.
Yeah, absolutely. And honestly, you know, now that I'm thinking about it, I definitely want to watch this again in better quality, because the torrent I had found of this one was like fine, but not, it was a little like sort of standard definition. This is one I would love to find an actual Blu-ray of, because the animation is just so fucking gorgeous. And I don't think there's one in the US, but I'm sure I could find one on like CD Japan or something.
Yeah.
Yeah,
no,
but
it's
man,
a gorgeous looking show.
Yeah, but yeah, that main Gunpla, that's honestly the thing that maybe struck me the most, is that, like, holy shit, that's a great Gundam. To the point, like, I kind of want a show built around that Gundam. It's such a good Gundam. I want, like, you know, fuck it, if you need a Gundam for the Witch from Mercury show they're making, just use the beginning G. It's great.
Yeah, it's a phenomenal Gunpla. And it is cool, then, that they do, as you say, it's not in it a lot, but they do bring it back for Gundam Build Fighters, which is a nice little reference. Another element of this show I really love, and is clearly a very like influential on what they do with Build Fighters, is you have the character Boris Shower, who is voiced by Namikawa Daisuke, who is a grown man now, but he played Al all the way back in War in the Pocket as a young boy.
Oh, I didn't realize that. That's so cool.
Yep. Yeah, so this is the character that clearly Meijin Kawaguchi is sort of like based off of. Here they call him a Gunpla Meister, because this is when Double Gundam was like brand new. And this character is so much fun, and there is a gag in this show that I find unbelievably funny, which is, I think is in the 3rd episode, the Boris Shower character is like getting on a horse, and he's just like in a Japanese city. He's like in Tokyo somewhere, right? It's not a field in the middle of nowhere. And he just gets on this horse and rides away. And then there are 2 other people that were standing with him, and he's just like, come on! And then they just start jogging after the horse. It's like, they don't even have like a bicycle or a car, let alone another horse, and they're just jogging after this dude. And the show doesn't comment on that at all. It just presents it very matter-of-factly, and I find that joke fucking hilarious.
It's so good. And when he arrives at the building he's going to, he like ties the horse to the fucking like bike rack and runs up into the building. And it's just so, I love that there's this eccentric Gundam Meister who I guess is famous enough that he can just ride around Tokyo on a horse to go play with his plastic models and no one will stop him.
Yes, and he's some like random German dude too. Like, he's not even Japanese. It's Boris Shower. A more German name you could not possibly have.
They really should have given that character trait to Meijin Kawaguchi. I think that would have been great if, like, when Yuki in Gundam Build Fighters becomes Meijin Kawaguchi, they present him with the mask and then like a saddle, and he's like, "What is this for?" And he walks outside, and there's like a gleaming white horse waiting for him.
Yeah, it is. I just love that they, clearly they had this idea here of just like, what is like the most ridiculous, over the top, like super Gunpla guy that we could possibly make, and then they just kind of reuse that character concept later because it's so good.
Absolutely.
And then I guess for me, the other thing about the show that is just interesting is the commercialness of it. So I posted on my Twitter last night, from when we're recording this, a link to one of the McDonald's animated commercials that is in Japan. So Japan has this like tradition of, there are lots and lots of these. There are lots and lots of animated ads that are in a very anime style. They're usually about 90 seconds long, and they usually are like fairly narrative. And so the McDonald's one I posted, if people want to watch it, basically is a 90-second ad telling the story of a teenage girl looking at a wanted ad posted outside of McDonald's, and then one of the women working at the McDonald's says, "Hey, come on, let's work here." And then she gets to the job, and then you get a montage of her working at the job, and at first she's really bad, and then she starts getting better at it, and then the woman who's her senpai at McDonald's that kind of brought her in like leaves the job, and then the girl looking at the ad now is the person who's working there, who's worked there for several years, and now there's a new girl looking at the ad, and she's like, hey, I'm the main character of this ad, now I'm like the manager or whatever the fuck of this McDonald's, come work here. And that's a very standard structure of these kinds of commercials. Again, there are like dozens and dozens of these things, not just for McDonald's. This McDonald's one is just one of the ones that's like got kind of a little bit like infamous around the internet, so that's how I ended up learning about it. And this OVA is basically one of those, just with like a bunch of really luxurious fight scenes stuffed in there. Because it's got all these scenes of like the dad with his son, and they're like looking at the Gundam anime, is like, oh, this is so nostalgic. Oh, I can't believe how nice these like Gunpla things are. Like they don't have to glue them together like we did back in my day. And that whole like appeal to the generational element of the product is like always an element of these kinds of ads, in the way that in the McDonald's commercial, it's the senpai to the kohai and that kind of relationship, and passing it down that way between coworkers. But it's just hilarious to me how much it fits in this very clean formula, along with the very emotional piano music they play in all of those scenes in this OVA, that they're just like, it is such a fucking commercial that then just has this very expensive looking animated Gundam fight in it, and I find that fucking hilarious.
No, it's funny, and it is totally effective as an ad too, right? Because it starts with like the trip to Odaiba, which I'll just say, like, for me was nostalgic because I went to Odaiba 2 years ago, and I've been in that spot, and I didn't wind up buying a Gunpla there because I didn't know how I would get it back to America, but like I, looked at all the cool figures, and I saw all the Gunpla, and I saw the Unicorn Gundam, and it was super cool, and like, so I'm thinking about that while I'm watching, and of course it starts with him, being introduced to Gundam through the Gunpla, and then growing up over time and becoming he is a Gunpla Meister at the end, and is sharing it with the dad. It's it's very effective at the thing it's trying to do, but as you say, stretched out to 40 minutes with like a full kind of like narrative scaffolding on it.
Yeah, I just find I find the scale of it very funny, and I think my favorite scene in that regard is there's this moment at the beginning of episode 2 where the main character Haru has lost his fight against Shower, and then he's like, it looks like he's like really bummed out, and then his friends show up to cheer him up. And then it turns out that, oh, actually he's fine, like he's going to go, rebuild the beginning G and make it even better this time. And then you get this shot in the hallway with the doors like cracked open a little bit, and the mom and the dad are there. The dad's like looking in and peeking in, and he hears that like his son's okay, and then he kind of gives like a thumbs up to the mom, and that's when the like emotional piano music starts playing, and I'm like, this is such a good manipulative fucking ad that is targeted to like, because it's not just about the kids, it's also the parents of the kids, and it's like it's like you could show it in a fucking like school for marketing, because it's so effective at tugging on just the right heartstrings. It's very good at what it's trying to do.
Of all the things you could be buying your kids, Gunpla is one of the better hobbies. You will,
Yes.
I think one, Gundam is good. Two, Gunpla is actually kind of cool and creative, and they might have some transferable skills later on. So it's a cool thing. One thing we didn't talk about that we absolutely need to talk about is that this is where the bear guy comes from.
Yes.
Because Rena, his little childhood friend, who's sort of like the model for China in Gundam Build Fighters. Rena and Sheena. Rena gets an ack guy and builds an ack guy, but she thinks it's kind of ugly, so she puts a little like bear face on it, and then over time develops into the full bear guy, but it's built out of the ack guy. And I guess I had never quite realized the relationship between the bear guy and the ack guy, because by the time you get to Bear Guy-san in Gundam Build Fighters, it's all custom, right? But in this, it's still built off of the act guy, and I just fucking howled laughing at that. It's so good. And then also, I love the entire final fight in episode 3. It's really fantastic, and part of that is you have Rena out in space with the bear guy that is not made for space combat, and it's really funny.
Yeah, everything around the bear guy in this is fantastic. I adore the little Ak guy that's got the little like bear hood on it.
Yes.
And then she's also put like a plastic fish in one of its hands because it's like to look like one of those like cheesy wooden carved statues you'd have of a bear swiping at a salmon in a river or something like that, which I guess is like a big thing in Japan, but it makes me laugh because it's also a big thing in fucking Colorado, It's
right.
like you get that a lot in like the mid and Midwest of America. You get those same kinds of bear statues with the fish that they're referring. too. And then, yes, then you get the actual bear guy, which is a lot more like sort of robust and robotic looking here than the bear guy-san in Fighters Try. But I do love, it's got a little, it's like this kind of like standard backpack that I guess Japanese elementary schoolers use. I don't know if they actually use it, but it's what they use in anime, so that's what I'm just basing on, the little like red backpacks. And then that opens up and it's got a bunch of missiles in it. It also has a little recorder that's on the side, and she takes the recorder off and uses it, and it's like a fucking beam rifle, basically.
I laughed so hard. It's so good. I actually, you know what? Now that we're talking about it, I'm realizing how much I loved this OVA. It's just... fucking, if it were just the bear guy stuff, I would love it. But there's so much good stuff packed in just 40 minutes.
Yeah, it's not like a, life-changing piece of Gundam or whatever. But as like a little oddity, it's so much better than it needs to be, I guess, is like kind of how it feels. It's like, this could be so much more of just a throw it off, whatever, here's just an ad for some Gunpla. And instead, there is a lot of, like, heart and care put into it. And, like, you can feel a lot of, like, the same voice of it having the same writer that Build Fighters and Build Fighters Try has. Because it's, like, sense of humor and character is very similar. And it works just as well here as it does in those shows. It's just at a much smaller scale.
I mean, you say it's not life-changing, and, yeah, on a personal level, not necessarily. But, like, it's now shaped over a decade of Gundam. Because there have been 4 full TV series that spin off of this thing, and countless OVAs, and like Gunpla completely reinvigorated in all over the world. Like, this show definitely left a pretty outsized footprint for being just a little 40-minute thing,
Yeah, absolutely. Its influence is tremendous. I think it's like not necessarily something that I would say like every Gundam fan must watch this thing. It's not like mandatory viewing, but it is like something that is well worth going out of your way to watch this if you can.
Yeah.
Because it's a good fucking time.
A very good fucking time. Beautiful. Overall, I think maybe the best thing we're talking about today. GM's Counterattack is pretty good, but like, just certainly as a standalone thing, like, this is the best of the 4 things we're talking about.
I would generally agree with that. Yeah, I think GM's Counterattack is probably close to this for me, but like this has the benefit of like it's not having to set up anything or like build off of pre-existing characters or anything. It gets to be totally its own thing, which is something that the rest of these things we're going to talk about today, I think, struggle from a little bit.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, so you want to move on?
Yes. So let's move on to, I guess let's hit Battlogue probably first and leave GM's Counterattack and Trial and Wars as I think the last things to talk about, because I think it'd be weird to end with Battlogue because I don't know if there's a huge amount to say about Battlogue.
It's also bad, and I don't want to end on a down note, because Battlogue, I think, might be the worst animated Gundam we've talked about. It's bad. It's not good.
Yeah, the only thing I like in Battlogue, like, completely is I do enjoy the third one, the Bear Guy one, a lot. I think that one's very fun. I think
one's okay, yeah.
I think the 5th episode is, like, at least I enjoy that fight.
Yes.
But most of these, yeah, not particularly remarkable. But basically what Battlogue is it's a series of 5 10-minute long shorts or so that were airing around the time that GM's Counterattack came out. The 5th one of these ends with like a announcement of like when they were going to announce when Gundam Build Divers was going to come out. So it's kind of like a promotional thing, sort of saying, hey, the Build sub-franchise or whatever is going to continue, even though none of these characters are going to be in that, because it's totally its own thing. But it was sort of like a bridge, I guess, in a marketing sense for that kind of stuff. But they're 5 standalone episodes, each one about 10 minutes, and each one telling its own kind of concept. And I think probably my biggest overall criticism is I think like most of the stories they choose to tell, I have no idea why. If you have this opportunity of let's do a couple of standalone bits with some characters from Build Fighters and Build Fighters Try, there are a lot of cool things you could do. And I feel like most of these ideas are just like total wastes that like, why would this be the concept you're trying to execute on?
Yeah, I mean, it's bad. It feels like it's aimed at little kids, but like not trying that hard. It really feels like they were like just scraping the bottom of the idea barrel for most of these, when, as you say, I can come up with 5 ideas for 10-minute Gunpla battle fights, but I don't know, this is not very good. And I think the first episode, the AI Battlogue one, might be the most baffling thing in all of Gundam, because the whole premise of the AI Battlogue episode is that now, like, Meijin Kawaguchi is with his, like, assistant buddy, and there's this new tech where you can have an AI of like a character from the Gundam TV series. So they get Char Aznable in Meijin Kawaguchi's suit, and they get Ribbons Allmark in the other suit, and the joke is Ribbons is voiced by Toru Furuya, and Char is surprised by this because Ribbons sounds like Amuro. They did get Toru Furuya, but they didn't get Shuichi Ikeda, so it's not Char. And the whole, like, that episode, if you had Shuichi Ikeda, would be a pretty entertaining 10 minutes, but it just falls completely flat because the whole time I'm confused. Like, I have to imagine they animated that whole thing thinking they would get Shuichi Ikeda, and then it was a surprise when they didn't, and they had to put it out anyway. It's such a bizarre thing.
Yeah, it is. Since this is the second time I've watched these, I think I was able to enjoy this one a lot more than I did the first time, because I knew it wasn't going to be Shuichi Ikeda, and I knew it was a different voice for Char. And, like, if you get past that, there is some fun stuff in there, but it is so hurt by the fact that you're not getting the actual, like, chemistry you're wanting between Char and Amuro. Because then the other, like, part of the thing is that Ribbons loses, but then Adams switches out the AI personality from Ribbons to Amuro, and then Char and Amuro fighting, and then it ends in a draw. Which, like, that's fucking great. And this is by far, I think, the best animated and best looking of the 5 Battlogue episodes. It's just, it doesn't land. I mean, they do, I think, probably, like, the best they could. They get Toshihiko Seki to voice Char. This is, he voiced Raul LaCruz in Seed. And he's not really doing a Shuichi Ikeda impression. He's more or less doing the voice he used with Rao, while having more of, like, the inflection and intonation that, like, is very, like, distinctively Ikeda. But it just doesn't land. Like, it just doesn't work.
Because the premise of the episode is having Shuichi Ikeda and Toru Furuya. So it doesn't have its own premise. The Toru Furuya side is fun. Like, there's a moment where he says, "Why do you sound like Ribbons?" And Amuro goes, It's a coincidence. And it's like, the way Toru Furuya reads that line is fucking hilarious. But it would be 10 times funnier if it were Ikeda on the other end of it.
Yes.
And you had that chemistry. It's just, and it also is just confusing, because it's not like Ikeda wasn't working with Sunrise in this period. I assume he's probably on the more expensive end of voice actors, but maybe figure that out before you do the animation. It's so bizarre.
Yeah. Like, I would guess that it was probably more of, like, a scheduling thing than it was a cost thing. Because this is true of all these Battlogue episodes, that there are only about 2 or 3 voiced characters per Battlogue episode. So, and it's even something where it's like, in the 3rd episode, they have the narration is done by Kotono Mitsuishi, who voices Sei's mother. And Sei's mother is in some shots at the beginning of the 5th episode, but totally unvoiced. Like, not even, like, a grunt or something. So it's clear that, like, you know, these are very low budget, very throwaway. They were streamed online. I don't think these were ever aired on in the TV context, though they are in the same, like, home video set as Tri-Island Wars and GM's Counterattack. So it's like a pretty ragtag production that I'm just guessing some sort of timing didn't work out to get Shuichi Ikeda in there, but they could get Furuya and they could get Toshihiko Seki. And they just had to roll with it, is probably how that happened.
Yeah. The 2nd episode should be fun. It's not. It's Yuma and it's Minato from Try, who are fun together, but they make it a very kind of flat, bland, just rivalry thing, and they're trying to, like, go into a factory. It's just this and the 4th episode both have the problem of having, they're just action with no narrative context, and the 4th one is even worse because it's action with no narrative context or characters I know or care about. So it's just very, very flat, and it's boring, and nothing really to say.
Yeah, the 2nd one is, to me, like, there's just nothing to talk about. Like, it's just, okay.
Yeah. So I agree the 3rd one is the best overall. It's certainly the most memorable because it has things like Bearguys getting crucified. Yeah. It has the weird-ass idea of Guy heads that are, like, trying to get revenge because they were never built, and then they send them all to the plastics factory, and there's actual live-action footage of the factory where Gunpla are made. And then it ends, and it's all done with Super Fumina and Gyanko as her own Gunpla. At the very least, it's memorably weird.
I think episode 3 of Battlogue is fucking great. I just think I love this so much because it's all also it's like 3 or 4 parodies on top of each other because I mean it's all the like it's already got all it's like the Gundam jokes about the Ak guy and all of that. It then also is done in the style of there's a series of SD Gundam shorts based on a Famicom game featuring the Night Gundam, and this is like early SD Gundam stuff. And all of that is like, it's basically like what if you did Dragon Quest style JRPG tropes, but with Gundams. But then also, it's very confusing because you have Night Gundam, who's just an SD Gundam, but there's also, here's like a chibi Amuro in Knight armor, but he's just like a human. And so they made a couple of OVA shorts that are in that series. And it's very much in that style. I think one of the pieces of music they use is literally from that OVA. And so they're doing that parody on top of they're also doing a Pretty Cure parody because it's a whole like Maho Shoujo thing where they like Super Fumina transforms into Winning Fumina and they have a transformation sequence and Kotono Mitsubishi is like narrating over it and because she's also Sailor Moon, so she's like one of like the OGs from that genre, and there's a bunch of catchphrases like Futari wa Gundam, we are Gundam, which comes from the title of Pretty Cure, which is Futari wa Pretty Cure, we are Pretty Cure. So there's like all these weird references just going every which way. And then you also have this like weirdly dark plot where, as you say, Bearguys are being crucified, and they're being crucified on like crosses made out of the runners, the plastic runners from a Gunpla set. And then you find out it's all because the unused plastic Akgai heads that are included in Bearguy sets because it's how they are efficient about producing parts at the Gunpla factory. So that's like a real thing. Is if you bought a Bearguy set, there would be an Akgai head like plastic piece in there that you just never use. And it's about them trying to avenge themselves, but then they solve the problem by having them recycled and turned to ecoplastic. It's like, that is so fucking bonkers, ridiculous, crazy. Also, China is there just as Bearguy itself.
Yes.
It is like, if every one of these was like this, I would love these Battlogue episodes. Like, this is what they should have done.
Yes.
It's just like, just go fucking absurd and crazy and ridiculous with it and just do a bunch of weird deep Gundam cuts and horseshit like that, because who cares? It's mostly just an ad for whatever the new Gunpla is in, because every episode also has 1 or 2 new Gunpla that they're selling, like the Winning Fumina and the Hyper Gyanko in this one. And that's like really why these exist. So just make the plot as fucking stupid and ridiculous as you can, because at least that's very entertaining.
I agree. You have talked me into loving this one. I was a little baffled by it, but I think it is an act of pure creativity. I think I was cynical coming into this one because the first 2 disappointed me so much. I think if I watched it again, like on an island, it would be great. And I do love the Winning Fumina. I think Fumina with like, because she basically gets like the jetpack pieces from the Winning Gundam, and it's really cool. It's a nice design. Maybe if I ever get one of the like Fumina kits, I would probably get the Winning Fumina. It's a cool one.
Yeah, this is the one Battlogue episode because it's got the best new mobile suits in it, or I don't know if you call them mobile suit, whatever. Winning Fumina and Hyper Gyanko are. But yes, it's fucking crazy. I feel bad for the Ak guys. Ak guys are cute too. People should build Ak guys and Bearguys. They're both good.
Absolutely, I should do both of those. Anyway, good stuff. Episode 4 sucks. Episode 5 at least has Sei and Tatsuya Yuki, and I do like the character dynamic of Yuki just being Yuki and not being Meijin Kawaguchi, and wanting to hang out with Sei and battle, and then the battle is pretty good. Like, if they were all sort of at that level, and then you had a couple that were like the Fumina and Ganko one, this would be totally fine. It's just, I was a little tired by the time I got to 5. If 5 were 1, I would enjoy it more.
Yeah. I mean, I don't want to just skip past 4 because 2 is bad, but 2 is bad in a way that's just so, like, pedestrian that you're like, whatever. Like, 4, I think is actually, I kind of like a little bit more in 2 just because it's so, like, why would you even make this? Like, of all the ideas, you've got your cast of characters from Build Fighters and Build Fighters Try. What are your combinations and weird ideas you're going to do for a 10-minute little short? And it's like, let's take the 3 brothers from the original Build Fighters that fight Meijin Kawaguchi in what is, to be fair, one of the best fights in that show, because that's the one where they use all like the weird tactics with their sniper gem and stuff like that. And that is a very good episode. But they are a really minor part of that of the original Build Fighters, and you do an episode about them fighting a duel against someone you don't know what's going on, because they're not revealed what their opponent is even at the end. And at the end, it's revealed it's the Meijin Kawaguchi. And this is one of those places where you know how fast and dirty this production was, particularly on the voice acting side, because this is where Meijin Kawaguchi is there, and he's just like smirks at them and says nothing. And it's like, surely there should be a line of dialogue from the Meijin here as a punchline, and there's nothing. It's just like, he's just standing there and smirks, and then it just like quietly goes to credits as they do the thing for all these during the credits. There's a couple of lines of dialogue from the characters in the show, and none of those lines of dialogue are from Meijin Kawaguchi. He's just like ominously silent, like he's some fucking serial killer or some shit. It is so weird.
Yeah, it's nothing. It's just a nothing episode, and like, it's, at least as you say, it's a bizarre nothing episode, because it's against like a Gundam Exia, and it sort of like Setsuna, you see a little bit as like he's a figure inside the suit.
That's the only part of that's the one thing that elevates this above episode 2, is that the shot of, because it's a perfect grade Exia, right? So, which means it's like a much bigger to relative scale of the other mobile suits in the episode. And when they like blow up in the cockpit or whatever, there is a 2 scale Setsuna F Sei sitting there, which in the real world would be a little figure, but relative to the tiny mobile suits that they're piloting, it's like a giant Setsuna F Sei. And there's like one shot that I find that idea amusing. I'm not saying that they do anything good with that idea. It's something that I wish, it feels like an idea they had to do in an episode of Build Fighters, and they just never found a place to do it in one of the 2 TV shows. And so they're just like, let's just put that shot in here and have a big Setsuna F Sei just sitting in the cockpit, because it's a perfect grade Gunpla and the scales are weird. And that's the most that this episode gives you, which isn't much, but it's just that slightly bit more than episode 2 gave you.
Well, there you go. So episode 5, as I said, decent fight, decent character dynamic, it's fine.
Yeah, it's a good little fight. Like, I really like the whole, anytime there's a fight in a Gundam thing where they're fighting in space and then someone gets grabbed by gravity and then they go like through the atmosphere, they start fighting on the ground, that's always going to be a good time.
Yeah.
Like, that's just a cool idea. It's always going to be cool. The fact that it's also, these are like dynamic, interesting characters from a TV show you like, right? So it's just like, just having Iori and Meijin Kawaguchi there in and of itself makes it, I think, inherently more entertaining than any of the other episodes, just from a character dynamic level.
Yeah, because like I said, I like the idea that Meijin Kawaguchi takes the mask off sometimes and goes and hangs out with Iori because they're friends and they respect each other's fighting skills, and it's a way to challenge each other to the limit, and I totally buy that. So
yeah, and I like there is a consistency in the way they depict the way the fight goes, in that Iori is clearly outclassed in terms of his like piloting abilities. Like, Yuki Tatsuya is like clearly a better pilot than he is, but Sei's got more like gimmicks and things like that he can do with his Gunpla, and so he's clearly better at like the Gunpla building side and understanding that, and some of that plays into the dynamic of how the fight goes, which is like a decent little element. As I said, like, if this was like the average level of quality of the rest of the episodes, the Battlogue thing would be like a fun little experiment. But as it turns out, it's like, well, you've got episode 3, which is batshit crazy in a fun way. This is like a decent little fight. And then you've got 3 episodes of mostly kind of nothing. And you end up just kind of confused by the Battlogue experiment by the end of it.
Yep, it's 1/5 okay, 1/5, holy shit, what the fuck did I just watch? And 3/5.
Yep.
You want to talk Try Island Wars?
Yes. So then let's move on to Try Island Wars. So this came out in 2016. So it's about 2 years after the end of Try airing. Or no, not quite that much. Just
about a year and a half, actually.
Yeah. After the end of Try finished airing. And so it's a 35-minute OVA, telling a story after the end of that show. Like, I'll say, I don't, as someone who also just didn't particularly like Gundam Build Fighters Try very much, I particularly don't like Try Island Wars. I find this very boring. But how did you feel about it? Being someone who you like the show, it comes from a lot more than I do.
Yeah, I liked the first half when it is just character comedy dynamics. I was fine with it. I think the action, once you get into that, is just, it's boring and flat, and there's not enough plot. and it's just very repetitive. But, like, you know, we didn't really talk about the harem anime side of Gundam Build Fighters Try on the Try episode. And I will say, the thing I do like about that is that the way they play it is it's a harem anime where the boy doesn't know he's in a harem anime. And I like the complete haplessness of Kamiki Sekai in that does make me laugh. And I think it's pretty funny here. So I liked that fine. I don't think it's great at any point, but, like, just hanging out with the characters is fine. I do think, like, there's not nearly enough, like, narrative motivation for the main story, and so I found it a little bit of a drag. I do not think it's essential viewing, even if you liked Try. It's whatever.
Yeah, because it's interesting because, like, I feel like everything you're kind of saying about this is exactly how I feel about Try the TV show also. Because I kind of feel like the issues with Try Island Wars, to me, are very reflective of the issues that the base TV show had, which is when it's doing its light comedy, it's fine. Like, this is very heavy on the harem comedy, which I just find super generic and played out. I don't like it in the main TV show. Like, the dynamic you're saying with Sekai is super generic. I think this is like an issue of, like, I've just watched a lot more just like broad anime from this period of time than you have. So it's like I have seen this exact thing so many times, and it's just so by the numbers in this show that I just am, like, tired of it as a concept for comedy, particularly because it doesn't feel earned in the sense of, like, I don't actually feel the sense that any of the women are actually attracted to Sekai in, like, an actual character way. It's just they're written that way so you can do the joke, and then when you're not trying to do the joke, that aspect of the character is totally jettisoned, right? Like, when they're having a fight and it's the middle of a fight sequence, you never get the sense that Fumina has a crush on Sekai. It never comes up. It's not a part of her character. It's only a part of her character when they want to make a gag about it, and that to me is really boring, and that's what keeps it at this very sort of generic level. And that's, like, the first half of this OVA is just a bunch of those kinds of jokes, and like with Try, they have some funny-ish jokes in there, but don't actually spend the time they need to set up the dynamic for the episode. So when the time comes for them to do the action, they haven't set anything up, so they don't have anything to pay off, and so they just have some action that's very unmotivated in an emotional sense, and then the episode just kind of has to end without having been about anything the whole time.
Fair enough. I don't really like Try Island Wars. I do like the mobile suits in it. There's a lot of good mobile suits in Try Island Wars, particularly the Gantz a lot, which is the best of all the Gan variants in all of the Build Fighters universe. It's fantastic, and I like that a lot. I think Fumina has a new version of the Winning Gundam that I think is cool. I like the one that Yuma is piloting. There's a lot of just good Gundams in that final fight, but the fight itself is not particularly, like, complicated or creative.
Yeah, because it sort of just redoes the idea from the end of Gundam Build Fighters, where they're fighting this kind of, like, faceless enemy of the crystals are animating these Gunpla.
Yes.
But whereas, like, Build Fighters was a whole show, like, where that's this big payoff for all the relationships of the characters you've followed along the way. Here, especially removed from the context of the TV show it comes from, it doesn't have enough time to make that feel impactful, because it's like you have to spend... I mean, it's like 19 minutes of the episode before that happens. So it's like over half the episode has gone by without them doing anything really meaningfully connected to the main plot that then causes the fight to occur. So it's like by the time the fight happens, you don't have any emotional investment. And since there's not an antagonist, it's just a faceless enemy. It just sort of compounds on that fact even more.
Yeah. The big, like, narrative twist and hook of the episode is that at the end, you find out that the little girl who's been running around the island, who caused all of this accidentally, is Reiji and Isla's daughter, who came in from the alternate world. What did you think of that?
I got a couple funny things about that. One is, it reminded me as soon as that, because I had, like, totally forgotten that that's what happens in this OVA. Until when I saw the character again, and then it flashed in my memory, oh, right, that's what they did. And then I remembered that the first time I watched Build Fighters Try, like 5 years ago, I think I had, because I was looking up, I knew that they had done these specials, and I was looking up what order to watch things in. And so I think I had inadvertently at some point just seen the sentence, Reiji and Isla's daughter, in something connected to Build Fighters Try, not knowing where it was from. So it's like, I sort of slightly spoiled myself on that idea, but not knowing the context of it. So when I originally watched Build Fighters Try, when it gets to the point when the Shia character is introduced, who is supposed to be Wilfred's sister. I was convinced the first time I watched the show that she was actually secretly Sekai or Reiji and Isla's daughter because she's got the white hair and she's mysterious like Isla was. And so, and they kept on saying, it's like, no, she's Wilfred's brother. I'm like, no, she's not. I knew, I accidentally read something on Wikipedia or something. I know where this is going. And then that show ended. I was like, I thought she was. Wait, what? Wait? She's actually Wilfred's sister, and then obviously watched Tri Island Wars. It's like, oh, this is what I watched. So I remembered having a weird experience with Tri the first time I watched it because of that weird info.
So here's a question.
Yeah.
Does time move differently in the other universe, or did Reiji and Isla have a kid like immediately after getting to the alternate world? Because their daughter is like 7, and it's been 7 years. Like. Because Reiji and Isla were like 15. What happened?
I mean, it's not, hey, you know, different cultures, it's different expectations. It's just, you know, I know that like teen pregnancy is something that, you know, we have a stigma against in our culture for a lot of really good reasons. But, you know, through lots of cultures and periods of history, it was totally acceptable, I guess, you know. So they just teleport into the other world. They just immediately get to it. I assume that's what you're expected had happened between these shows, because yes, I am with you. It feels weird, because you do see Isla at the very end of the episode, and she's got a couple lines of dialogue, and it's hard to tell if she's supposed to be older than like her mid-20s, which is what she would be, like early to mid-20s at this point.
Unless I am also okay with the time moves differently explanation. Sure. That's fine. There's nothing wrong with that.
But there's also nothing that says that in any way.
Right.
That's just like a thing that you assume because it would be awkward for it to be like they had a kid at like 14 or 15 years old. And that there are lots of other stories with parallel universes where time moves.
I mean, just to spoil GM's Counterattack for a second, that means that when Reiji comes in GM's Counterattack, he's got a baby. Like, what if the ending of because they made GM's Counterattack after this. The ending of GM's Counterattack should have been Reiji walking away with Sei, and Sei going, so how have you been, Reiji? How are things in your other world? He's like, I got a kid. What? You have a kid? Yeah. That'd be great.
I had not thought about that aspect of GM's Counterattack. You're 100% right. It's just like, yeah, it's that scene in GM's Counterattack at the end where everyone's like, Reiji, let's go, like, have dinner together. Come on, I'll treat you to a steak or whatever they say. He's like, no, sorry, guys. Me and Sei have got some unfinished business. Right, Sei? And Sei's like, yeah. It's like, hold on, give me a sec. And he, like, walks around the corner and comes back with a stroller with a baby in it. It's like, Fellini, can you look after her for, like, 30 minutes or something? Like, me and Sei have got to do this thing.
Or we find out that the reason he's in Sei's world is that he's running away from his responsibilities. Like the baby was just born and Reiji is freaking out. Yeah.
You know, there's just a much more seedier, like, romance drama that, like, just around the edges. I mean, to be fair, like, we don't ever see Reiji in Tri Island Wars. Like, we're just assuming that Isla and Reiji had a kid. It's entirely possible that their relationship didn't work out. Isla met another very nice guy in the alternate dimension and had a kid. You know, very few people's like first high school romances are like big long-term things. So
I love the idea that by the time Sei goes and puts the burning Gundam in the trophy when he graduates from school, that Reiji already has like a 3-year-old daughter.
Yeah.
It's just, their lives moved at very different paces. Anyway, maybe this is reflective of how little there is to say about Tri Island Wars, that we're now mostly talking about GM's Counterattack.
Yeah. Here's one thing, I'll say about Tri Island Wars. I guess there's a couple things to say. One is that the back-on insert song, the last one, fucking slaps. It's great.
It's very good.
It's very good. Another is that, like, as my frustrations with Build Fighters Try in general, there is this thing of, like, there is absolutely, like, a totally decent story to be told here. They just tell it completely in the wrong order, right? They should have made the relationship with the mysterious girl who's Reiji's daughter, who, by the way, is voiced by Sakura Ayane, which is, like, there's, like, 5 lines of dialogue, but she's Ochako in My Hero Academia. She's what the fuck's the character's name? The Shrine Maiden from Genshin Impact, Yuji, or...
Right.
Yeah, Miko. Like, she's a great voice actress. She has, like, 4 lines of dialogue. I don't know why they bothered to get Sakura Ayane, unless maybe they thought someday there'll be a sequel to this, which obviously hasn't happened. But what they should have done with that character is have Sekai and friends like meet her early on the island, have like they do this whole montage at the end of the episode where they like all build a gunpla together and have fun. That kind of stuff should have been earlier in the episode.
Yes.
Building a relationship with this young girl who then she's like gets frustrated because it's hard for her to make the gunpla, and so she like uses her magic alternate dimension powers to steal that gunpla, which causes the whole thing to happen. And then they defeat it and save her, and then are like tell the moral of the episode, which very brutally Fumina says to her right in front of Sekai. Sekai's standing right there, and Fumina turns to the little girl and says, you know, gunpla isn't something that you just battle with. Gunpla is something that you make for yourself and fight with your own gunpla. And she says it like twice, and Sekai's standing right there. And it's like, you don't have to fucking subtweet the motherfucker right in front of him, Fumina. Like, goddamn. And it's like, that moral and all that would be fine. But you didn't tell a story about that up until the moment you're now saying that that's what you were doing. And it's like, it is a very exaggerated version of, I think, some of the narrative problems that the TV show had, because now it's all compressed in this one 35-minute special. And I think that's like my main kind of takeaway is I think it's an interesting lens on like where the difficulties are with Try in trying to tell those stories, and like where I think it kind of falls short. Yeah. The TV show is reflected and exaggerated in its OVA.
Totally fair, and I mean, because basically this has the shape of like one of the Persona spin-off games where like you have all the characters hanging out, and then there is one new character who comes in that they help out. And I think you're totally right. They have it so backwards that is the revelation at the end and not the beginning. I think there actually is a pretty good episode to make here. It's just they didn't do it. So you want to talk about a good one, though? Move on to GM's Counterattack?
Let's talk about a good one. You know, again, this is not like the most amazing Gundam you'll ever see, but I think it's a very interesting contrast with Tri-Island Wars, what GM's Counterattack does, because it's a similar thing of where it's a 30 minutes. It's a little bit shorter. It's about 5 minutes shorter than what Tri-Island Wars is. And it's set, like, I think about a year after the end of Build Fighters, and it's like one more story with that cast of characters set after the events of its TV show, which is like a more or less the same sort of assignment, I guess, that Build Fighters Try was given in terms of like, here's what you have to work with. And I think GM's Counterattack is actually pretty successful, even if it does, I think, ultimately feel too rushed. Like, I really wish this was like 45 to 50 minutes long, and it could be, I think, like really great. It gets all like the fundamentals down really well, and I think it's got some really strong payoff at the end.
Oh, the last 10 minutes are fucking fantastic. I mean, there's a moment when Reiji comes in, and you have, I think, an even better back on insert song come up. And that's like a get on your feet and cheer moment. It's so good. It's up there with some of the stuff at the end of Build Fighters. It's just so fulfilling. The final fight between Sei and Reiji that we see at the end is tremendous. The animation and like the hand-to-hand combat stuff you get there is so good. Like, I think the first 20 minutes of the special are like good, not great, in that it's like it's a fun like excuse to bring the characters back and have them do something together. It's the GM in GM's Counterattack. Before I saw this, I thought was GM from like the GM Gundam.
Yes.
But it's GM, it's the Gundam Mafia, and that made me laugh very hard. The Gundam Mafia is here, and it's great. But it's mostly just an excuse to bring back your main sort of set of characters, Fellini and Mao and Niels Nielsen and Meijin and all of that. They fight together. There's some really good action sequences. There's a part where fucking Sheena has a Bearguy carrying Fellini's like broken Gundam so he can shoot. There's some really good choreography like that. It's totally fun. And then I think when Reiji shows up, it kicks into a higher gear because it becomes a good sequel payoff to ideas from the original. And definitely, if you have seen and liked original Gundam Build Fighters, this is essential viewing. This should like be in the DVD set with it. It's a really great little sequel.
Yeah, absolutely. I enjoy it a lot. It's got this feel for a lot of it in that middle stretch where they're going and doing the one-on-one fights. It reminds me so much of the BoJack Dragon Ball Z movie.
Yes.
Where it's like, it's this tournament that has been tournament type structure that has been hijacked by these villains, and then all the protagonists go off and fight one weird villain in some like bizarre, it's a field of flowers, and this is like a swamp or whatever. And I really like the BoJack Dragon Ball Z movie, so if something reminds me of that, I'm like, this is a good time.
DBZ Movie 9 is a good movie. Yes.
Yes, absolutely. And I think the thing I like about GM's Counterattack, one of the things I like is that it has a very short amount of time to do what it's being asked to do. And again, I really wish that this thing was like 50 minutes because it would be fucking amazing if it could be. But it knows it's got a short amount of time, and it's just so fucking like ruthlessly efficient at getting at what it needs to do that like the main plot of like the Gunpla Mafia and that and all of our main characters have all been like set up and introduced by 5 minutes into the episode. It's like so on point, like again compared to Try Island Wars, you go to 19 minutes before like the main plot starts happening, and this is like we got to get the plot rolling immediately and then find the spaces after that point to do our little character bits. And I think it's like really effective at having that each character has their own little fight. They get a little moment with their little fight that kind of has something to do with the specific personality of the character. I think Mao's is like the most memorable, both for how like ridiculous it is with like the DOA beach volleyball like jiggle physics thing going on there, which normally would, I think that gag would annoy me, but it's so ridiculously over the top here that I think it goes all the way around to being very funny to me because it is like very 2005 original Xbox era like fighting game style. This is how we think breasts move. It's just like the lady takes a step and it's like you're just like spinning two giant things of jello on sticks and flailing around wildly is like their idea of it, but here's just played up for humor.
And it plays against Mao in very funny ways, yes.
Yeah, because it's a good pair up for him, because one thing we know and that they reestablish at the beginning of the episode is his dedication to Misaki-chan. So then when that happens, Mao's about to be tempted, and then he remembers Misaki-chan, and then you get this joke that I love so much. She shoots the giant fucking laser out of the space colony, and then on the side of the laser with this really great sound effect just pounds these 4 characters, Misaki, and then the character for life. Like, it's like Misaki for life is basically what it says on the laser. And then it cuts to Misaki, who's watching it on the feed, and then she gets very embarrassed by it, and that is a very funny gag.
Yes, exactly. No, it's very good. Yeah, all the individual matchups are memorable. They're fun. As I think I agree with you that I think if this got to be like an hour long, it might be something truly great. But as it is, it's better than I expected. Like, it is a above average version of this kind of thing. And I think the thing it needed to do best is the Reiji return. And I don't think they could have done that any better. Like, that side of it, the last 10 minutes, is pretty much perfect. And it does very much have like a better than average DBZ movie kind of feel to it, but with that extra emotional payoff that a DBZ movie would never have because it's not really allowed to have it. So it is kind of like a above average DBZ movie, say movie 9, something like that, and then you tack on a really great ending.
Yeah, absolutely. And that whole sequence where Sei gets to the last guy or whatever and he's fighting him, and that whole sequence of where it starts with Sei has built the Star Burning Gundam, which then eventually becomes the Build Burning Gundam, and he's piloting that because his actual Cosmos Strike Gundam got stolen by the Gunpla Mafia. And so he's fighting his own Gunpla, and there's something about how compressed it is here that I actually really like, that just doesn't work against Sei at all. It's like 30 seconds later and Sei's like, well, I built this thing. Like, now that I'm fighting against it, I can see, yeah, right, like, it's tuning when it's strafing to the right or whatever is like really wobbly and this, that, and the other thing, and he just like disposes of it immediately. And I love the detail that like that Gunpla Mafia guy isn't even piloting the Gunpla. He's just like turned the AI up to like insane difficulty more or less, and just like is standing there letting the AI fight in the Gunpla for him. And then he gets his giant, I love this idea, the Psycho GM, that's just like the Psycho Gundam, but with a GM head on top of it, which is very funny.
Yes, absolutely. The Gundam Mafia uses GMs because they like the acronym, you know?
Yep.
Why not? Yeah, no, it's good. And again, when Sei is having that moment and Reiji pops up and puts his hand on the wheel for him, or the little control stick, and then you have that back-on song kick in. We never stop, here we go.
Yep.
Moichido. It's so fucking good. It's so stupidly good. And I do think also their fight they have at the end, oh my god, it's just so good. Yeah. It's the payoff you want watching that final episode of the TV series. Like, not that I need a sequel at the end of that TV series, but if you were to do it, that's the payoff you need to give. They give it, and it's that part of this is done as well as I think I could imagine it being done.
Yeah, it's a really, since I knew the content of all these things, I left GM's Counterattack for last when I was watching through them. It's like, I want to save my favorite one of these for last, because this is like, well, I think like probably like on its own in many ways, like beginning G is probably best constructed in the sense that like it has the most time to do what that thing wants to do, whereas like GM's Counterattack really has to like kind of move through things faster than I would like. But it you know, I just love Gundam Build Fighters so much, and I love those characters, Sei and Reiji, so much, that getting that moment of being able to send them off and being able, both of them to be able to fight each other at their best, and have that scene, it is so satisfying. That you know, and as far as we know, they're not going to go back to Build Fighters specifically, right? Like the Build franchise lives on through the Divers thing. And maybe eventually it'll transform into something else Build related. I'm guessing we're going to keep on that sort of sub franchise for a while. So if this is like the last time they visit this specific set of characters and this specific version of the story, I'm very glad that they like went back to the OGs and kind of like let it end there. And also it's like a nice kind of, if you watched it in a slightly different order, it has a little bit of like a passing the torch to Try moment of this. Also then hooks up to putting the Build burning into the trophy in the club room that then 7 years later, or 6 years later, I guess, Reiji or Sekai will find at the beginning of Try. And that's also a nice little like sort of like tying that knot together that makes the shows feel a little closer than they did before.
I agree. I like the prequel side of it, because it's that at the very end, which I think is very sweet, seeing Sei do that, and like that's the last thing he does in school. That just, I love that. That's a very Sei Iori move that feels, but like, I remember like, you know, looking at trophies the last time, like leaving stuff at high school, you know, it was, for us, it was like debate club, but like, I remember that very, very vividly, and I love that. But also, like, they introduced, like, this is the building of the Yajima Stadium, where the Nationals are going to be in Try, and that they have that memorial where the Plavsky particle accident happened. So it does a little light prequelizing, and it does a good job at that.
Yeah, it connects everything together and makes it feel like it is, like, one longer, like, sort of world that the Build Fighters shows were set in.
Yes, absolutely. And yeah, if that's the conclusion to it, it's a good conclusion. And, you know, and Reiji has a 3-year-old baby.
Yep, you know, he's a teenage father. It's awkward, but I think, you know,
he's abandoning his baby to go play Gunpla with his 15-year-old best friend in another world.
Yeah, you know, there is a certain point at which, like, the enthusiasm and love for your hobby thing can be a bit too extreme. And maybe that will be when they do, you know, Mobile Suit Build Fighters 2 in the future. There's a direct sequel to Build Fighters, and it's all about, you know, I know we said it's like, it's a love for the game and competition and all of that, but there's a certain point at which you're not really doing it for the game. You're more doing it to run away from your responsibilities of being a new father, Reiji. And it's a very mature Gundam for a new era. But I think it's going to be pretty good. Yeah.
Yeah. I'm just imagining, you know, Sei and Reiji are walking home after their match, and Reiji's like, oh, let me stop in this convenience store. I need to buy some diapers. Sei's like, what?
Yeah. Meanwhile, Sei has just started his second year in high school.
Yes, exactly. And, you know, Reiji's like, look, the diapers on Earth are just better than the ones we have in my world. What can I say? You guys have this industrial production. All right. Anything else to say about all these fucking OVAs? I think we have done the Gundam Build Fighters world as much justice as we possibly could, giving it a full trilogy of episodes here.
Yes, I don't think I really have anything to add other than that. I like the build stuff. I like these. I like this.
I do. Some of these OVAs stretched my love a little too far. But overall, Build Fighters is one of my favorite corners of Gundam, and I'm glad we devoted 3 episodes to talking about how wonderful it is.
Yeah, and you know, we skipped a little bit ahead in the timeline to tackle these, because of course, these were coming out more or less contemporary to Iron-Blooded Orphans, which we're not quite to yet. So, looking forward, Jonathan, to the next episode of Weekly Suit Gundam. We're going to get to something I have been very eagerly anticipating for a long time, because it's a show I've wanted to desperately rewatch for the longest fucking time, and I somehow locked myself into this podcast for like 3 years where I had to rewatch Gundam in order, and I'm like, well, I gotta wait. Like, I wanted to rewatch the show like 3 years ago, but then, you know, this podcast, it's a little bit of a double-edged sword. Mostly it's very good. In this one way, it was slightly annoying. But finally, we get to return to the lovely and strange world of Yoshiyuki Tomino. It's Tomino's Counterattack. He's coming back since Turn A Gundam to tell us a little bit about G, motherfuckers. Because next time on Weekly Suit Gundam, we're going to talk about Reconquista no G.